Welcome back, everybody. Typically, at the end of the cycle, at this period of time, there was this dead time. And we brainstormed this last cycle, and we thought what might be really of interest is to bring some of the venture capital folks up, introduce you to what they do a little bit, and then we'll open up to Q&A. We'll go until the NASA folks are done deliberating, and that'll probably be 4:45, 5 o'clock. But in the short term, you guys met Rich, and I thought he did a really good job yesterday at lunch on, frankly, making me appreciate the country more and sort of how NASA had affected the American brand. But I wanted him to take a minute and just tell us a little bit about Starbridge Partners.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Starbridge Partners, Steve Jorgensen, Mike Mealing, Gary Bickford. I'm sorry, Gary, if you're out there. We decided to get together and start a space investment VC company portfolio. Now, Stephen and Mike have done this before. Steve runs a couple of hedge funds. I'm kind of brought in as the guy who has all the connections and the technical know-how to look across the spectrum of all the things that are happening out there. I've got quite a big black book. So beginning of last year, we decided, shall we do this? We brought in a broker, a securities broker in New York, I'd worked with for like 4 or 5 years. And we decided we're going to look at doing dual use, what's useful up there, what's useful from up there down here, vice versa. Because there's so many things that I've seen that, I look at a technology that's in a laser-focused area of space, and I think that could be used down here. I mean, that particular technology could be enormous down in the global economy. And I'd done that once before with Zero Gravity Solutions, where we were working on the space station and looking at different types of agricultural products, whether we're doing stem cell research on station or biostimulants to grow food in space. And when you have a stimulant that can grow food in space, that's one thing. But when you try it in California, it's like, wow, look at that. That really did something special. So we started Starbridge. We're trying to close our first round. Right now we're using special purpose vehicles for our investments. But we're getting there. We're really quite bullish, and we're really keen. And what I've been telling people is, if you're an investor, which internet companies did you buy in 1993? Did you buy Yahoo? Did you buy Amazon? Or did you buy furniture.com or pets.com? Because there's a big difference in your outcome. And we're saying it's a similar kind of nexus point coming with this new market. And we're trying to make sure that we can show people how to mitigate the risk, because we kind of understand the technical and the financial aspects of it. So that's what we're trying to do.
So you mentioned dual-use companies. Did you see any of those technologies this week at NASA iTech?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you asked me which one of these companies to invest in right now, I'd have a real tough time to actually think about which ones I would invest in, because, and for different reasons, some of them are really almost ready to go to market. Others have not quite figured it out, but you can look at it and go, that's a good technology. You just need to wrap a few more little resources around it, or a team member or so. But yeah, some of these people are really potentially enormous, I think. I really do.
And Robert, could you tell us a little bit about Kalis Partners?
Sure, thank you. My name is Robert Wigan, and I'm with Kalis Partners, LLC. It's not a partnership, it's an LLC. And we're a company that deals with consulting and financing and investment in space-related activities and technology. Now, the word Kalis is the Roman god of the sky. The Greek equivalent is Uranus. So we have a planet associated with our company. And talking about planets, Kalis is the father in Roman mythology of Venus. Now, Venus was not created the normal way, and if you want to find out how Kalis created Venus, that's your internet research project for today, because I'm not going to tell you. We at Kalis are big supporters of the NASA iTech Forum. We've had personnel at every single NASA iTech Forum. This is my third, and we think it's an excellent source of seeing new companies and new technology. And I look forward to many more, and I have to compliment Tom and the rest of the people here who create this forum. It's marvelous, and I'm glad we have it.
So, the sweet spot, if I'm an entrepreneur out there thinking about, I need some help, what kind of assistance does Kalis provide, and what's your sweet spot in the marketplace? How would I engage with Kalis, or how would I know if I'm a likely candidate to need your help?
Well, I am on the Kalis Board of Advisors, and so I do discrete projects for Kalis, and lately I've been involved in the scouting of new companies. So I go to events such as this, and I look at the proposals and the companies, and I make sort of a judgment as to whether or not there will be interest from our company. And then I switch roles and I become an advocate. If I think there's a company that we should invest in, then I go to the management of our company and I say, look, this is the one that you should follow. If I'm successful and I convince them to do that, then my role switches to that of someone who does due diligence. And for those of you who don't know the term, that's a term that lawyers use to mean you investigate a company to verify their information and to see if there's any problems. You diligently investigate, and that's why you come up with the phrase due diligence. So I do that. I don't have a technical background, so when I do technical due diligence, I have to contact people like NASA technologists and the like, but my personal background is in law and regulatory activities and policy. I've been a lawyer who was a litigator both in state and federal court. I've been a lobbyist. I've even been a registered foreign agent. Sounds a little bit scarier than it really is. So I have a background in space law and space events and the current trends in both international law and domestic law. So I can do that type of due diligence. And quite frankly, some of the barriers to these new companies is not technological. They always need financing, but a lot of times it's regulatory. And there's certain issues that have to be solved, and there's new issues that are on the horizon that I can do the due diligence of that. So that's my role within Kalis, if that answers your question.
On a very specific basis, yes. More broadly, what are some of the services that Kalis, outside of legal and your own practice, what other things might I engage Kalis for or with?
Well, Kalis does consulting, and that can be for individual companies or governments, or in some cases, international organizations. But then when it comes to financing, Kalis can assist companies in obtaining financing. And in some instances, Kalis can be an investor in companies themselves. And so we operate based on really what the needs are of the company that we're working with, and it can fall under those headings.
Okay. Thanks very much. So Andy, you represent sort of two initiatives, I think Sway and sort of an incubator. Can you tell us a little bit about those organizations that you're with and sort of the roles they play?
Sure, glad to. Thanks very much, and thanks again for the invitation to participate here. It's been a great event so far. So Sway Ventures is a pure-play venture capital firm headquartered in San Francisco. I run the Washington, D.C. office with a couple of partners, and the other organization you referred to is called Next Cubed, which is more of an incubator accelerator, and they're also co-located in San Francisco with Sway Ventures, and I represent them in Washington, D.C. as well. On the Sway side, and I think some of you may have looked at the website and seen the companies there. They're represented by a number of different funds that we have. We currently have in aggregate, about $500 million of assets under management. That's focused currently on 60 companies in the portfolio, which are for the most part represented by what we call frontier technology, which is augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, computer vision, cybersecurity, robotics, and of course aerospace. About a year and a half ago, we looked at what might be, we think, the kind of coming trend, so to speak, which has already been referred to here, and which I think is well demonstrated in the event today, of venture and startup firms in the aerospace and space technology arena, and decided to stake out some territory, which we've now done, and now have a number of investments in those kinds of companies, both with Sway Ventures as well as with NextCubed. And of course, as I mentioned on the Sway Ventures side, that's more of the Series A, Series B, and seed series type of investments, where we make an investment with a company and then obviously continue to try to accelerate their growth through their lifetime. On the NextCubed side, that's an accelerator and incubator activity where we bring companies in for a period of 4 months into a core program, work with them over a period of time, and then of course at the end of that time, then try to, of course, make them capable of going out and really doing two things, which pretty much all venture companies need, and that is one, access to financing, and then B, and knowing how to raise that financing, and then B, then going out and get customers in the marketplace, because market traction is what counts, and if you don't have market traction, you don't have a business. So with that in mind, that's where we focus. And on the aerospace side as well, we've also developed a partnership with Amazon Web Services, and we're running a program with them that's an aerospace pop-up accelerator. We've done a number of sessions already in San Francisco and Houston, have one coming up in Florida in November.
So if I wanted to participate in NextCube, do I have to move to San Francisco?
No, not at all. In fact, good question. Thanks for asking. It would be nice to move to San Francisco, but we don't offer housing. So with that in mind, what we do is we run through this 4-month program a combination of face-to-face and virtual accelerator incubator activity, such that normal program would be you get together for a couple of days, maybe 3 days up front, then the rest would be virtual for the next, let's say, 8 weeks, kind of get a mid-course review, back again face-to-face for a day or two, and then close up at the end of the program with what we call a showcase, where we bring a number of our companies together that have been part of the either last cohort or on a rolling basis all together in a showcase event, as I said, which includes a number of investors in our ecosystem, try to get them kind of, again, as I said, up to the next level.
And so if, and generically, not any specific company, did you see any companies this week that you thought you might want to invite to be at NextCube?
So the NASA iTech program has been great for us. This is, I think, the second or third one actually we participated in. So first one for me in this forum, but nevertheless that we've attended, and it's been very good. A lot of great companies. We applaud NASA for really screening and vetting, what are high quality companies, so appreciate that. And so the answer is yes. We look at this opportunity really is, of course, for us, deal flow, and to be very clear, the success of our business is based on really two things. And that is one, our ability to go out and raise capital, which we do and have done well enough so far and continue to do, but secondly, then to be able to deploy that capital into high quality companies. And there are lots of great companies out there, but not all good companies, of course, and that's what really counts in the end, because we have to bet on winners, because if we don't, then our LPs won't invest capital with us the next time around.
And so when's your next cohort, or where should folks go if they wanted to find out more information about your accelerator?
Good question. So the core program, which I mentioned, which is a 4-month program, is open on a rolling basis, and there's a website we have that's actually just nextcube.com, nex3.com, which has then the application there, and then separately under the aerospace category, then there's the application for the aerospace accelerator program we have going on in Florida next month.
And you and I were talking, I think, when you were in DC, and you guys are currently raising a fund, is that right?
We are. In fact, that's on the Sway Ventures side. We have now raised about $110 million of a $300 million round, which should be completed in the next 4 or 5 months, but we are currently deploying capital actively.
Okay. And then, Rich, you guys are raising a fund. How big is that fund?
Ostensibly, the fund that we're trying to raise at the start is $75 million. We've got a ways to go, and so it's an axiom in the venture capital world that what's the reason to start a fund? It's so you can start the second fund after you've done it, And
we would agree with that.
Yeah, and everybody wants to be the first to write the second check, So it's an uphill struggle because we're not in an easy market. People, I've met some very sophisticated people through NASA iTech when they've looked at investing in space on a more global level. and they say, we have no way of doing the due diligence. We have no way of checking this out. And so we're trying to be there as part of that kind of due diligence process where we're saying, look, we understand the industry, we know the players, understand the technology. This is real, this is, this is not. And so we're hoping that we're going to be able to move that ball forward with the more senior kind of investors that are around the world, especially in the banking industry and stuff like that.
And I imagine that's where the sort of dual use story comes into play, because if they can't
It
sort of
does.
due
In
diligence the space,
in actual
then-
fact, it was the guy at Citibank, a good friend of ours, Jay, who said to me, he said, don't say this, say dual use. And I went, thanks. That was great.
So Robert, you said that from a legal perspective, you try and provide some input. In your estimation over the next, say, 12 months, what do you think some of the more important regulatory or law changes that might affect folks that you've interacted this week might be sort of on the horizon?
Well, if we're talking about everything, law, regulations, and policy, the National Space Council has made some very, very important space directives in the area of giving direction to going to the moon and other areas. But a lot of the lawyers are talking in terms of moon. They're starting to talk about who's going to own the resources that are taken from the moon and who is going to own the resources from asteroids. There are international treaties on the subject. The Moon Treaty is one where the U.S. is not a party to that, but it's a party to the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And we, as Americans, are interpreting this as not preventing us from claiming ownership of the resources that are taken from the planet. In fact, in 2015, the NASA reauthorization bill has a section in it that says that Americans or U.S. citizens have the right to go to the moon and take resources, and they can own it and possess it, sell it, transfer it, bring it back to Earth, and that it's the sense of Congress that that does not violate any international treaty or obligation, and it's not a claim of sovereignty over that. And so now that we're getting more and more closer to actually mining the moon, lawyers are now starting to talk about that as an issue, and can we do it without any more international agreements, which you can't get a lot of times because you can't get consensus on it. And so that's a hot topic. Another hot topic is orbital debris. Some of the space insurance companies are now saying it's not a question of orbital debris, it's a question of orbital collisions. And let's start changing the dialogue to say, if you're a satellite owner and you have debris out there, you're going to be liable for collisions when your debris hits some other satellite, and therefore that would be a motivation for companies to voluntarily come up with ways to remove their debris. There's also some companies that are getting into the ability to remove debris. There's some growing concern over security of space assets, and that's another hot topic. And there's also the hot topic of Ishtar and ITAR, I should say, and any kind of regulation of international trade that affects the space industry. So that's only some of the many topics that are now of concern to space lawyers.
So it's straightforward then.
Yes.
Andy, over the last, say, month or so, the stock market seems to have gone crazy. I don't know, it's up 500 points one day, down 500 points the next day. If you were starting a business in this environment, is that going to have any impact, do you think?
Well, sure, it always does. I mean, because that's the psychology of the market, and so it may have a short-term impact. But I would say this, and that is that I think for the first time, and there are probably others here in the room, as well as, of course, down the hall that have more experience in this than I do over time, but certainly I think this is really the first time in quite some time, probably at least a decade, maybe two, in which we've seen really a growth opportunity in this area. And particularly to kind of quantify that, there have been a number of investment firms, which you all I'm sure know, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Deloitte, et cetera, which have a consensus forecast that says that in addition to the current investment that's being made in space and space technology, which ranges in the 500 billion range, that there's going to be about a $1 trillion growth curve on top of that over the next 10 to 15 years. And that's significant. And so with that in mind, again, this comes back to our investment approach and philosophy, and that is, of course, we want to be able to find the right companies that are financeable, get in with them early because that's our model. But at the same time, I think it says for the industry as well, there's going to be a lot of investment made in this industry and in this area over the long term, meaning like the next 10 years certainly, and that this is as good a time as any really to kind of get into the market and begin to develop your company and scale it, because there will be, we think at least, a good amount of investment coming forward over the next several years.
I'm trying to figure out at the moment, this might be something Robert can answer, when does a resource become a reserve on a balance sheet? I'm trying to figure that one out.
There you go.
I mean, if I
First
have an
guy that puts
asteroid
his
up there that's
flag
an
in the
M-class
sand is where it
asteroid,
becomes.
I mean, how do I turn that resource into a reserve on my balance sheet? That, hey, there's $20 trillion just went on my bottom line.
Right.
So, Richard, while we've all been isolated in this room this week, there's been a world out there that's been spinning on. One of the things happened was the stock market seemed to go a little bit crazy. We got a nor'easter bearing down on us. And it seems the Trump administration has moved forward to formalize Space Force. Do you have any thoughts on how that might affect both sort of the space economy as well as sort of might rationalize things going forward or might formalize things going forward?
The only thing I have kind of wrong kind of idea with the Space Force is it maybe should have been called Space Guard. I don't have a problem with it because it already exists. I mean, NORAD and US Space Command, they already are there. They run all the assets, and as part of the Air Force, if it's better to be organized through a separate branch of the military, I honestly don't know if that's a good thing. Sounds good, Space Force. I did actually come up with an anthem for them. It's the theme to Fireball XL5. I think that would be the best one. But I have a huge amount of respect for US Space Command, and they have enormous assets to manage, and it's such an integral part of the warfighter's arsenal now. And so, is space a battleground, literally, where we're going to be shooting lasers at each other? No, that's not going to happen, because that would deprive us all of access to space. But it is an integral part of the warfighter's machinery, so really important.
And Tom, if I could add to that, because in Washington, of course, we see these things kind of every day almost, with recent announcements from Vice President Pence and certainly the administration on this. I think there are a couple things which are worthwhile paying attention to. One, and that is that, to Richard's point, once they get reorganized into a Space Force, which looks like it will happen, that's going to increase budgets, and it'll increase budgets over the current top line. And so that'll be significant. In fact, a subcomponent of the Space Force initiative at this point has been focused on the Space Development Agency, which is the core of that. And the Deputy Secretary, Pat Shanahan, has already requested through Congress, or will be requesting through Congress, about $15 billion as a starter budget for that Space Development Agency, and that's significant. So that means, number one, there'll be a lot more investment. Number two, there's going to be a lot more activity, because really in the end, the doctrine and the mission of the Space Force will be largely focused on force protection, that is our space assets, and ensuring that they're defended properly and being more active in that defense. But at the same time, there'll also be, of course, no surprise, an offensive element of that equation, which then further increases, of course, the budget and technology development and everything else. So I think over time, once this begins to coalesce, that there's going to be even more impetus and investment into this area.
Do you think we'll get more weaponization of space, rods from God and stuff like that?
That is probably the inexorable result.
So, Robert, you mentioned that Kalis had been involved with NASA iTech almost since the beginning. And you mentioned that the type of assistance you provide, do you have any use cases or examples of where you've engaged with a previous winner or even a non-winner of NASA iTech and have been able to sort of push them forward?
Well, first of all, I've been with Kalis only since January of this year, so I don't know about the past.
I may be able to give you some examples then.
Secondly, the answer is yes. We have. What we do is contact the companies and we start a dialogue with them and we get to know what their needs are. And a lot of cases, they're very open with us. They'll tell us where they stand in terms of raising their money, how much hard money they have, how much soft money they have, and then we see how we can fit in. We give a lot of advice really for free because not only are we consultants and investors, but we also are promoters of space activities, and we feel that we should help people if they have the heart and soul to go into the space arena and do these things. We should give them little tips and things of that nature, and so we do. We tell them who they should contact and things of that nature. Specifically, who we've talked to, I'm not sure I'm at liberty to reveal that, so I can't. But we have talked with some of them, and they've been good, fruitful relationships.
And I'll come back to you in a minute, Andy, because there's a different line of questioning I wanted. But Richard, I know you've been involved. I think you and I became aware of each other at Space Foundation's event in Silicon Valley, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, it might have been, yeah.
And I know you've engaged with some of the companies as well. What kind of needs have you seen where you've been able to provide connection or resources or...
Yeah, I think we have been able to provide connections. We do have, like I said, a big black book, so we've been able to say, you need to go talk to this person or go see these people. We have invested. We've made, through Starbridge, we've made total, overall, about 10 investments, but only 4 recently. Not huge investments, what we can do with what we have available to us. But we are getting closer to being able to close that first round, and so therefore we are talking more aggressively to people. And like Robert just said, we are very much engaged in helping them because they're spacers, they're like me, But as a venture fund, we look at it as not as a space thing. It's a thing that we know about. We understand the space industry as much as anyone can, but it's still a financial play. So it's still risk mitigation, it's still risk management. And so we look at it very much from a financial, we're not starry-eyed. So I've met some of the people that we've had, and some of them I'm going, oh my God, you need to really button down on your IP, or you need a business person in here to help you with your business planning. You need to really stop and think about the way, like I said yesterday, the 3 key things is like timing of your next raise, your benchmarks, and your valuation. Otherwise, you will lose control of your company. And sometimes that's not a bad thing. Sometimes, I love crazy mad scientists. I think they're the people who pull the train. They're the people who pull us out of the caves. But they're not always the best people that can manipulate their ideas and turn their invention into an innovation. I've seen really brilliant people empty the whole mag into their feet, so and I like to protect them. I like to feel that we can protect them.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. That was actually the sort of line of discussion I wanted to ask Andy about, which is a lot of times investors bring more than their checkbook to the table. A lot of times they bring their Rolodex to the table. Right? They have the ability to reach back. Maybe they have an entrepreneur in residence that's between gigs that can say, hey, you really need, in Richard's word, a business person in here. We have access to this fellow or that fellow or this woman or that woman, and they'd be really good in this role. Does Sway take that kind of role in your portfolio companies?
We do, and thanks for asking. It's a good question. So we've taken kind of a following approach to venture investing, which is not necessarily unique, but I think not as many people do it as we do. and we try to really actually make this part of our secret sauce and value add for the companies we work with. And that is that typically, of course, most companies that get funded, we're glad to take the check, of course, so to speak, because that's what is required to get them to the next step to help them scale and grow. What we want to do is sit right alongside them for that period of growth and acceleration and actually help them accelerate the growth actively. And so what we do is we bring a set of mentors, advisors, et cetera, and our ecosystem actually to bear to work with those companies in order to be able to do that, because it's clearly, obviously, in both our interests, that is the companies and ours, in order to be able to ensure that they get to the next level sooner rather than later, and build their client base, build their market, get market traction, and of course, try to get to the next level with respect to the next funding event or whatever the case might be. And so with that in mind, we work very closely with them, and we've got a number of different programs we use. We've got about 50 former CEOs, CIOs, CTOs, CFOs, COOs, et cetera, most of them out in California, but a number on the East Coast as well and around the country, to help them, that is the entrepreneurs, actually work with them and bring that expertise to bear in order to be able to then get them to the next level.
Thanks. So I'm going to relate sort of the following story to you guys, and then I will get your take on it. My experience has been that oftentimes when I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to raise money, I don't recognize that it's not only me trying to convince the investor to invest in my vision, my dream, but in some regards, it's also a dating sort of environment where I have the right to say, you may have the money, but I don't really like you, right? And in the in dating, it's always everybody's on their best behavior and looks good and smells good. But it's a marriage, if things go right, if an investment's made, it's going to last 5 to 7 years. And it's most important, not when everybody's on their best behavior and everybody's sort of in the dating, but 3 years from now, when things go south, it's important that we like each other because we can sit at a bar drinking a beer and figure out collaboratively how we work it out together. What's your views, respectively, on the relationship between sort of the investor, advisor, mentor, and sort of the mentee, entrepreneur, visionary?
I think one of the things I loved about living in America is that in America, you're allowed to fail. And it doesn't mean that, you're a failure, go away and do something else. It just means you've gained experience. And that is an enormous learning curve. You learn more from failure than you do from success. In other countries, that you fail once, it's like, go away, don't come back, don't show your face around here again. And I think that's very different about the culture and lifestyle here. But I do agree with you that there's times in a relationship when you're building a company, there is time for, shall we call it, not smart money. Because I mean, right now with one of my companies, we've got some money that people are saying, "How can I invest? I want to invest," and it's just it's like, "Hey, whoa, slow down. We don't need people to invest right now." And other times it's like you say, "I really need smart money in here," where I've got an investor who brings more to the table. And the last big investment we did up in Canada, we brought a great investor to the table. And they are just so much more than just the dollars that they put into us, because they're going to be like our big brother, and we have access to all their $4 billion of engineering prowess and nous, plus all the rest that goes with it. So I think that strategic relationships like that have to be, you have to be very carefully put together, constructed, but also we believe at Starbridge and at STH, Space Technology Holdings, that everything has to be completely ethical. We won't do, if anything doesn't smell right, we won't touch it. And I think that is real key to having good, successful relationships where, even if there's a failure, you can go and have a beer afterwards because nobody feels that they got screwed.
Robert?
Well, in my time with Kalis, I haven't seen anything go south yet. However, as a former divorce lawyer, I know what it's like.
So we're getting the hook here. So I want to thank you all for your time. I apologize that I got to cut you off before we can finish that.
I forgot one call out for Lindsay. I forgot to say Lindsay if she's out there. Hi.
But with that, we're going to turn the time back over to Kira Blackwell. Thank you all.
Thank you.